So you might be considering buying a T5 transmission. Well, here's some things to look for. First of all, I bought this one and it was already pulled out of the vehicle, so I don't know how many miles are on it. What can I learn about it? Well, number one, it has a Muncie bolt pattern because this, I'll call it an ear, is sticking out like that, and that's typical for a Muncie bolt pattern. Also, here on the passenger side of the transmission is a little flower, and I'll get up closer. You can see it says 92 on it. That's the year that this piece of metal case was cast. There's also another cast mark up here, says 92, and then finally there is another one over here on the shifter box that says 92. The shifter is a short throw transmission shifter, and I can tell that by how tall it is. If it's about an inch shorter, then it would be a regular throw transmission shifter, and the short throw is nicer because obviously it has a mechanical advantage. Lastly, there's an ear over here, and there's a paper tag. Now the paper tag, like a lot of paper tags, is it's faded and you can't read any numbers. But if there were some numbers on there, you might be able to see the number that is on this tag down here. Now that tag, if I get close, you can see it says 1352-222 right here. That 222 and the 1352 is an important number to look up on the charts. It will indicate what gearing is in this transmission if the chart is correct. The other numbers that are on this transmission, on the lid, on any of the other parts, are not important to know what the gears are. A lot of people think that they are. For instance, this number right there, that's not an important number. That's a part number, but it's not an important number to know what the gearing is. And finally, if you're ever in question if it's a T5, well, this bulge here shows that it's a 5-speed, probably. And then, of course, your shifter knob should say 5-speed, and you're good to go. Now I know what this is. It is a S10 transmission because of the location of the shifter box. If it was a Camaro transmission, it would be back here. So it's a S10 transmission. It has a Muncie bolt pattern. The tag number is 1352-222, and it has a short throw shifter, and it was cast in 1992. Now, if these parts were cast in 1992, there's a good chance that it's a non-world class transmission. However, I won't be able to tell until I open it up, or if I take the bell off, I'll be able to tell by the bearing retainer or the bearing race that's on the front side of the case. Let's take a look at that. So I've spent a minute to take the bell housing off, and I think I can show things more clearly. But I took the bell housing off because, number one, it can't be used for a Chevy engine. It's unless it's a S10 engine block. It won't bolt up to a V8 or an inline 6. So that bell housing is just scrap aluminum. But here I can clearly show the ears that I'm talking about. This indicates that it's a Muncie bolt pattern. If it does not have an ear like that on both sides, then really it's not a Chevy bolt pattern. Now, I knew this was a 1992 transmission as far as the casting dates on the pieces of metal, the tail housing, the case cover, and the case itself, but I wasn't sure if it was a world-class transmission or a non-world class. The non-world class went up through 1992. The world class started in 1993 in the Chevy S10 trucks, and if this was put in a 93 Chevy truck or late 92 truck, it could be a world class. So we're going to take off the bell housing. I've already undone the bolts, so I'll give you a tip. These are 15mm heads, And this one here is really hard to get off because there's a boss on the metal right here to engage that cover bolt, and it makes getting a socket on this really hard. So that's the last bolt you want to undo and back the bell housing off of the transmission case. As you're doing it, it'll make it easier. So here we are. We're going to take this bell housing off now and take a look to see if it's a world class. Now, I already had it off, so that's why it pulled off so easy. This bearing cup is the world class style bearing cup. So the gears inside here and the synchros, this is a world class transmission. Notice the ears here and here. That makes it a Muncie bolt pattern. 93 was the last year they used the Muncie bolt pattern in the S10 transmissions. So I got lucky. This is a nice one. World-class S10 transmission. Number 222 on the tag. 1352-222. Let's look that up on the charts. One additional thing about this is the bearing retainer, as I said, is a world-class bearing retainer race right there. And this has 14 splies on the input shaft. So that also is something that would be confirmed. If it had 26 splines, that would indicate probably a later model transmission, or somebody had been in it and swapped things around. 94, I believe, was the first year that they used the 26 spline in the S10 transmission. So I made myself a little cradle from 2x6s and 2x4s. Just screwed them together. I'll show you the dimensions in a picture at the end of this video, but basically this is to help stabilize the transmission while you're working on it. Another thing I use is this Black & Decker workbench, which has a slot in the middle, and you can use that to cradle the transmission for work. It just keeps it from flopping around on your bench top. So I recommend making a cradle. It's simple. So now we have the transmission on the cradle up at working height. Again, I'm assuming that you're looking at a transmission and using this video as a guide to help you understand what it is you're looking at and whether or not you are buying what you think you're buying. So this is a 1993 Chevy S10 transmission, and we're going to check the gears. Now, one thing I like to do is, it doesn't matter if the shifter goes through all the gears. Shoot, you could have a broken shift fork inside the transmission. You could have just gears that are trashed, and the shift forks are going to move, and you're going to go into each and every gear. But what you want to do is put it in first gear, turn either the tail shaft splines or the front splines, and make sure that they actually move together and they cannot be turned independently. Of course, one's going to move faster than the other. Then go to second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, and reverse, and make sure that in each gear, when you turn this shaft, that the rear of the transmission will also turn, and that they cannot turn independently. And then, of course, you can check neutral, where you can turn this shaft and hold on to that one, and it should be a slight resistance, but you should be able to hold it firmly without turning while this one is turned when in neutral. Let's go to the part where we check the transmission gears without ever opening it. One more thing about this transmission that I forgot to point out is this is a VSS style connection. This is not a cable speedometer version, and the cable speedometer stopped in 1988, so this makes sense that this would be a 1989 or newer S10 T5. But that is a VSS sending unit inside there, so it will take a VSS signal to read it. So the seller tells you what he knows about the transmission, and you're just not sure it has the gears that you are hearing from him. You want to check it out, and he's cooperative and is interested in what you have to show him, so that in case you don't buy it, he can at least tell somebody else. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put some tape on this end, and draw a mark at the 12 o'clock position, vertical, right at the top. We have a little dial here that I made by hand with a lid just for instruction purposes, but it's not necessary. And then on the back side, may not be able to see it, I have a mark with my magic marker right there. Let me turn it a little bit. There, you can see it. Let me turn it back. And it's at the 12 o'clock position. And that marks 12 o'clock there, 12 o'clock there. We are now going to turn the shafts. We're going to do so in the gear that we want to test, and then we're going to switch it to the other gear. So let's check first gear. Let's see if that 3.70 that was on the chart is correct. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to turn it counterclockwise. That will make the opposite end on the other side of the transmission turn in a clockwise fashion if you're facing it. And that will make it easier for us to figure out what's going on. So I'm going to spin this 10 full revolutions while someone on that end, the other end, counts how many revolutions that line goes around. Well, since I'm doing this by myself, I think I can do it. I won't be able to video it though. So 10 full revolutions of that line going to the 12 o'clock position, and I'm going to count the opposite end by looking at it carefully. So I spun the tail shaft 10 times in a counterclockwise fashion, making this travel in a clockwise fashion. I counted very carefully 37 turns plus wherever that line is, and the line is certainly past the 6 o'clock mark, which would be 5 on there, half a turn. So it's somewhere near the 6th position, and this is very accurate. Unfortunately, the charts on the internet are wrong. It's not a 3.70 first gear, it is a 3.76, and you will look at the charts and see that many other transmissions have the same first gear, 3.76. So the charts are not always correct, but this is foolproof. You can, as long as you can count, it's better to have two people, by the way. As long as you can count, you can calculate the gearing without opening the transmission. Let's do 5th gear and confirm if it's 0.72 or not. So to confirm 5th gear, I put the transmission in neutral again so that the shafts turn independently. Put this one at 12 o'clock and this one at 12 o'clock with my mark, and we're going to spin it again 10 times. Now, since it's in 5th gear, the input shaft is not going to turn nearly as many times, so this is going to be easier to keep track of if you're a one-person show. So with the shifter in 5th gear and the output shaft and input shaft both marked and at the 12 o'clock position, I spun the output shaft 10 full revolutions in counterclockwise so that this spins clockwise. And it rotated 7 times plus this much. And if we look at what that would represent, I think that's pretty doggone close to the 7.2 mark, using the 2 on this 10-figure clock. So 7.2 or 0.72, excuse me, 0.72 would be the correct answer, and that's what the chart says. So this transmission has a 3.76 first gear and 0.72 5th gear. It is a world-class transmission. It has a Muncie bolt pattern. It has a VSS output sending unit here. It is indeed a world-class based on that bearing retainer, or that bearing cup right there. And then lastly, it is cast in 1992 based on that mark. It is it's a good transmission to have, and it'll bolt right up to a Muncie bell housing, Muncie pattern. Well, that's all I have to teach you for now. It was a long video, but I think this will help you with a potential purchase of a transmission. If you're looking at an S10 to put in your vehicle, This is a pretty nice find I got. That's all for now.